Good evening and welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Brandis Friedman. Sparks fly in the first mayoral runoff debate.
Really important.
No.
You're really
spewing.
important. No, let me finish.
Fine.
It's really
I'm
important.
going to let you lie, and then I'll respond.
You know, I'm not accusing you of lying.
No, you are lying.
I think you're.
There's no lie that you clearly will not tell. It is sad and pathetic.
The race gets heated as Lori Lightfoot and Tony Preckwinkle square off in the first mayoral debate.
I do feel like I've been wronged in this process by a prosecutor who saw me as his ticket to stardom.
In a reversal of fortune, charges against former Congressman Aaron Schock dropped in exchange for him paying fines and the IRS.
Quit playing. Robert. I didn't do this stuff. This is not me. I'm fighting for my life.
Chicago R&B singer R. Kelly out on bail on criminal charges, taken into custody over unpaid child support.
Hey, Sterling May, how much did you pay to play?
The entire point of a community review process is to identify potential changes and improvements that the community wants and needs. This process has worked.
And the $6 billion Lincoln Yards development project in Lincoln Park passes during a contentious zoning committee hearing. Joining us are Marianne Ahern of NBC5 Chicago, Mick Dumke of ProPublica Illinois, Laura Washington of the Chicago Sun-Times and ABC7 News, and Steve Daniels of Crain's Chicago Business. Thanks for joining us, everybody. So first tonight, before that first heated mayoral forum, two polls show Lightfoot in the lead. Preckwinkle hopes the endorsements of Secretary of State Jesse White and Alderman Walter Burnett will translate to lots of votes. Meanwhile, Lightfoot nabs endorsements by the Firefighters Union, the Latino Leadership Council, and a deep pocket donor. And in Springfield, Governor J.B. Pritzker finally unveils the details of his graduated income tax plan as Republicans cry foul at higher taxes for millionaires. Marianne, let's start with, of course, the mayoral debate or the forum last night. You were in the audience asking questions. What did you make of it?
Well, it was pretty interesting. Yeah, clearly they don't like each other. And is that shocking? Not really. And I think that, but you know, the first few minutes of the forum, I saw two black women, or one of them going to be mayor, and Carol doing the moderator. And I thought, wow, you know, is that amazing? Three women on the stage, part of this whole event, and that quickly went downhill as they attacked each other very fast. However, you got to see a little bit more of who they are, what they like to do. I wanted to hear a lot more detail on how they're going to manage the city.
And I want to come back to that. The gloves, though, they really came off. Mick, what'd you take of that? What'd you make of that?
Well, I think their policies are actually pretty similar in a lot of ways, so I think they both see this as a race to try to out-progressive the other. And so you see Tony Preckwinkle trying to cast Lori Lightfoot as corporate attorney, someone who's become a fat cat and is removed from the issues that working people here face. And then you see Lori Lightfoot trying to cast Tony Preckwinkle as an insider, someone who maybe once was an independent but has been in power so long now that she's part of the problem.
Laura Washington, how does it look when you see two black women on stage? The gloves kind of coming off, each of them kind of name-calling, getting a little ugly.
Yeah, well, I talked about this on the show a few weeks ago when we were in the first round of the campaign, when we had so many women of color and they were going at each other. And it's unfortunate. I'd like to think that women, especially because we're in the fore politically now, nationally, that we can rise above this kind of negative campaigning. But you're right, Marianne. You know, they don't like each other. There's a lot of bad blood in history that goes back to the beginning of the campaign when Tony Preckwinkle, well, at least Lori Lightfoot claims that Tony Preckwinkle tried to muscle her out of the race, tried to get her out of the race, and it goes way back then. I think that there's two major themes that I don't think they should be talking about other than beating up on each other. One is Tony Preckwinkle clearly has a superior standing when it comes to knowing how to run a government. She's got the experience and skills. If I were her, I'd be talking about that. If I were Lori Lightfoot, I'd be talking about change. I'd be talking about reform and progressivism, but I'd be putting more meat on the bones of what that change looks like, because I think that's what this race really comes down to.
Steve Daniels, do you think they got into policy enough, or just trying to tear the other one down?
No, they didn't. And you know, the big elephant in the room in terms of the city and its future is its fiscal situation. One of the things about this campaign that has been very disappointing has been the lack of addressing that from these two and everybody else that was in the race before them as well. That's the first job, period, is how to get this city back on some kind of of a stable fiscal situation. After that, all those other issues are important too, but there's been so little discussion of that.
Don't you think that's because they know that it means revenue? And where are they going to get that revenue?
Well, they need,
and that's
but they got to talk about it.
They did talk about the progressive income tax last night, which J.B. Pritzker is supporting.
Right.
That's not a real solution.
That's at the state level.
Turning to the state for an answer.
And they've talked about cutting too, which there was some conversation about
TIF reform, which is legalizing marijuana, all of which might help, but isn't going to get at the bottom line.
The other issue is that they haven't looked at the books. They really don't know what the condition of the city is. So why commit yourself to policy decisions that you really can't make until you're fully informed?
There are plenty of people who've looked at the books you could turn to and get a quick primer on and get some idea of here's how much money that we need in future years to address the situation.
But it comes back to what Marianne says. The money's got to come. There's no money unless we increase taxes.
It's not free, and nobody wants to talk about that before the balloting starts.
Right. But in terms of the debate last night, I thought Toni Preckwinkle, she's got a tough job. Everybody knows who she is. Very few people know who Lori Lightfoot really is. So Toni Preckwinkle needs to define Lori Lightfoot for the rest of the voters in a way that makes Toni Preckwinkle look like a more appealing option.
But she's not. Instead, she's defining her in very negative terms, starting with election night, in terms of attacking her even during her own acceptance speech. And I think that's sort of the standard operating procedure that most candidates take especially when they have a short turnaround, is they try to define you negatively, especially because they need to bring. Lori Lightfoot is way ahead in the polls right now, if you believe the polls, and she's got to bring her down. But it also reflects back on her. As you saw in that debate last night.
How could she be ahead 30 points?
She's not ahead 30 points, but she's.
Especially when Toni has those unions. The Chicago Teachers Union, SEIU, they're showing up to vote.
Well, the problem for Toni is that her numbers haven't really moved since the beginning of this campaign. And others have gone up and down a little bit, most notably Lori Lightfoot. That's why we're here talking about her, this late surge she had before round one. But Toni's been kind of stuck. So she really needs to, she's obviously trying to depress the support for Lori, but she really needs to get her people out and rely on the union stuff. And the negative ad, I'll just say that the negative attacks, nobody likes them, but they work. That's why people keep doing it.
Well, that's why we're not talking about Bill Daley today.
But if you believe these polls, they aren't working so far for Preckwinkle, but it's still early.
Well, and like you said, Mick, could that be a benefit for Preckwinkle? If everybody else's numbers have been kind of up and down, is slow and steady, is that going to win the race for Toni Preckwinkle?
Well, that has to be, that I think has been her thinking since the beginning. She is a known commodity, which at this point in time seems like a bit of a disadvantage in the political environment we're in, where people are looking for fresh faces. But her advantage is that people do know who she is. People who like her are sticking with her. She's got these union support, the support of unions who have a lot of members. Now, do they have any kind of a ground game? Are they going to actually get out and do the old school door knocking and get people excited to go to the polls for Toni? I think that's a big question.
I'm just glad we only have 3.5 weeks. Can you imagine if this went on for 6 months? I mean, that is, well, we all complain about a February 1st election and then an April runoff. Thank goodness.
Yeah. And as you saw from the turnout, voters are not all that excited. They weren't excited by 14 candidates. Hopefully in this round you're going to get excited about 2, but the turnout was not that impressive, given that we were talking about an open seat in an historic election.
Were they not excited, or are they just overwhelmed by the number of
maybe
people?
Confused.
Or waiting to see what round 2 would.
Yeah.
And with those endorsements, Marianne, you just mentioned the unions that are behind Toni Preckwinkle right now. Are we going to see that kind of, are the unions and are these endorsements, are they going to make the difference for these candidates?
Well, and later, we're going to find out. Willie Wilson supporting Lori Lightfoot, and that countering that Toni Preckwinkle standing with 50 ministers saying, I got my own ministers right here. Chuy Garcia meets with both candidates over the weekend. Who does he support? I definitely think endorsements matter. Look at Lori Lightfoot got the Sun-Times endorsement, put her on the front page, and that put her right in there. I think that really made a difference in her campaign. It's weighing whether or not those supporters, Will Wilson supporters, truly show up and vote for Lori Lightfoot.
Do they look to Willie Wilson for guidance in other races, or do they just like Willie Wilson?
Right.
I mean, he's a millionaire, comes from humble roots. That's a great story that a lot of people latch on to, especially in areas where they're not surrounded by a lot of wealthy people. So I think that Willie Wilson has a particular appeal, but it remains to be seen whether he has any kind of coattails.
Well, and his particular appeal goes to more conservative, older African-American voters which are not, which should be Toni Preckwinkle's voters. And Toni Preckwinkle actually did much better. She didn't do as well as Willie Wilson did, but she did much better than Lightfoot on the south and west sides. But you got to wonder whether or not his supporters will listen to him, because we're talking about the first openly gay person to run for mayor. And he has told me himself, he's getting a lot of pushback, a lot of heat for going out to support Lori Lightfoot because of her sexual orientation. So will they follow that?
We've focused so much, and not we, but everybody, on the African American voters in this campaign. But you have to remember, white and Hispanic voters are more than African American voters. Who are they going to line up for now? We saw that Lori Lightfoot had very strong support in those sort of north side, white, generally speaking, more well-to-do wards. But the Latino vote, nobody knows. Those wards went for Susana Mendoza, generally speaking, and Preckwinkle and Lightfoot were distant also-rans in those wards. And no one's talking about those voters. So I think that's a huge wild card. There's so much vying for the African American vote. What about the rest of the city?
It's the Daley vote, the Jerry Joyce vote. That's a big chunk of the voting population.
Could the fact that Chuy Garcia's campaign manager is working for Lightfoot, is that going to make a difference for her?
It already sort of signals that if Garcia does not go for Lightfoot as well, then what's going on? Why would his campaign manager go right away and work on Lightfoot's campaign? And there does seem to be a little bit of an underground rift. Toni Preckwinkle did not support Chuy Garcia in his run. However, she did also make him her floor leader and part of her leadership in the county board. We shall see. His endorsements that he had for the citywide at Alderman Manick didn't work out quite as the way he wanted it to go. But I do think Chuy Garcia's endorsement is important.
It may be important, not so much for the Latino vote, but for the progressive reformer aspect, which we've talked about, is a really important piece of both of their identities.
I'm sorry, real quickly, you had the firefighters union come out in support of Lori Lightfoot as well. And standing with her were a couple of Northwest Side aldermen who aren't exactly known as progressives. And, Toni has tried to make that an issue. But is that a signal of where some of the Northwest and Southwest Side voters Steve was talking about are going to go?
And one of the aldermen quickly called and said, "Wait a second, Toni asked for my support too." So it is going to be ugly. Let's just say.
Not already.
It already is.
Wasn't there a bit of speaking of ugly, a bit of a kerfluffle with the announcement of Willie Wilson as well, endorsing Lori Lightfoot?
Well, yes. Not only does he endorse Lori Lightfoot, Toni Preckwinkle quickly, before the endorsement even takes place, puts out a press release to say, I had asked for it, but he wanted not only to retire his campaign debt, but appointments and jobs within her administration, throwing Willie completely under the bus, although she did ask for his endorsement as well. And I wonder if she had gotten it, if she would have told us that.
So how much?
Right.
We talked about boots on the ground or feet on the ground. What's going to make the big difference here? Is it feet on the ground or is it money? Lori Lightfoot picked up a big chunk this week from a deep pocket donor. What's going to make the difference for candidates?
I think money is huge. So getting your message on TV when you got a very compressed timetable here. We saw John Canning, Madison Dearborn chairman, and a business leader in this town for a long time, give $100,000 to Lori Lightfoot. Well, it should show up today in the records, but it was confirmed yesterday. That's a signal that where is business going to place their bets? And I think we're starting to see they're looking like they're going to be placing them on Lightfoot.
Well, that's just one endorsement. But I think the question for business
people are going to
leaders is that they don't really like policy-wise either one of these candidates.
Correct,
because they're pro-labor, they're tax and spenders. At least that's the way they're going to be perceived.
They're going to want a seat at the table, though, and I think that's how you get it. And
because it's always about somebody owing you something. And John Canning even came out when he made the endorsement and said that he's very concerned about funding for private schools, and so that's an issue. That's an issue that, just like Willie Wilson, everybody wants something.
Yeah, and we got to get to a different part of politics, though. This is fun, but there's more. A plethora of politicians were in court this week. The high-profile corruption case against Republican Aaron Schock crumbles. Former Alderman Ed Verdoliak pleads guilty to felonies for the second time in a decade. Alderman Willie Cochran, will change his plea to guilty for allegedly taking bribes and misusing funds. And in a new court filing, 2 more women say sexual misconduct allegations in Mike Madigan's office were ignored. Marianne, bring us up to speed here on Ed Verdoliak. He pleaded guilty to 1 charge, but this is not the first time.
Yeah, here he is back in court again. And I have to tell you that I was not there because I've been so wrapped up in the mayoral race and the debate. But it was interesting to see that as the judge asked him, well, how are you doing? And he said, well, not bad for an 82-year-old, but he will end up back in prison one more time.
Mick, what do you make of this?
It's just sad. I mean, it's sad, obviously, in a public, a level of public official, the roll call you just had of public officials in and out of court this week, and it's just kind of pathetic. I mean, Ed Verdoliak, Fast Eddie, he's in his 80s, still, enmeshed in the criminal justice system.
I think it's interesting, the timing, because we've got Fast Eddie, Verdoliak, and we have Alderman Ed Burke, who has been charged, and at the same time after 30-some years, way back in the days of the Harold Washington regime, when they were fighting Harold Washington tooth and nail in council wars, a lot of people had raised questions then about their ethics, about possible corruption. It took this long for both of them to get caught up with the law. And Harold Washington is smiling somewhere right now.
Sure.
And Aaron Schock, what happened there? That case crumbled quickly.
Well, it does happen, not often. I mean, it's the old adage that the feds can, they can indict a ham sandwich. Yeah. But a couple years ago, State Representative LaShawn Ford was indicted, charged with bank fraud, and he ended up pleading guilty to just 1 misdemeanor count, and essentially got off with a little slap on the wrist as well. And so here you have the same thing. So, we heard former Representative Schock talking about it. This was like an overreach by the prosecutors. So just a reminder that even though we write all these stories about people being charged or indicted, that it actually has to hold up during the process.
How does this compare to, say, Jesse Jackson Jr.'s case?
Well, Jesse Jackson Jr., of course, did not like it, and said, I also had to pay my money back and went to prison. At the same time, said, I enjoyed serving with Schock. It wasn't personal to him, but he did say...
serving in Congress, not serving time.
Exactly. Sorry.
We have to clarify, unfortunately.
Schock isn't going to prison.
Right. So, it does say what happened here. How could Jesse Jackson Jr., did he not have the same kind of good attorneys that Aaron Schock had?
Or there was some hint of prosecutorial mistakes or mismanagement in the case.
Personal, going after Schock for some personal reason.
Or just messing up. I mean, frankly, it's hard to understand the details, but clearly when you've got this case being put together for this many years and then it turns into this nothing burger here at the end, something went dreadfully wrong in terms of how the prosecutors handled this. To me, the big interesting thing now is whether he's going to try to run for office again. He's 37 years old. He's still an appealing personality. He's got a lot of political ability. So.
There was talk he was going to run for governor. Remember that?
Right.
I mean, he really was a rising star on the Peoria City Council when he was 18 years old, or school board. I think the Peoria School Board. I mean, he was just this guy that had, the sky was the limit.
Everybody loved his abs.
Yeah.
He was a good-looking guy.
He did not rule out a future run for some
and
office.
he won't have this on his record, so it would be a possibility for him. Willie Cochran, on the other hand, was supposed to have pled guilty back in November, surprised the courtroom when he did not, and now we're hearing that he has a change of plea hearing coming up later on this month. Any idea what changed there?
Well, he saw the light. He knew what was going to happen. Apparently, he's going to also resign from the city council next week. It wasn't going to go well. He had to say, all right, how long am I going to drag this out? They had the goods on him.
He also may have just used this time, he and his attorney, for leverage to get a slightly better deal. I mean, we don't quite know, but yeah, the writing was on the proverbial wall.
Also in the court, in other court news, Grammy-winning Chicago artist R. Kelly jailed again. This time, the court locked him up over unpaid child support. This after a bizarre interview with Gayle King, and he blames his ex-wife for his plight. So he's back in jail for unpaid child support. He came, though, prepared to pay $60,000, expecting he would get a payment plan. Is the judge being harsh here with sending him back to jail over unpaid child support?
$160,000 is what he owed in unpaid child support. It takes a lot of, messing around and not doing what you're supposed to do to get to that point. Given that he has a lot of financial problems, I think the judge was right on this one. I got to say, though, I think that interview was stunning. I've never seen the interview with Gayle King. I've never seen anything like that, and he needs a really good crisis management advisor to tell him how to conduct himself, because he didn't do himself any favors. I think the best person that came out of that was Gayle King in terms of the way she handled him. And he was up screaming, yelling at the kid, not even talking to her, and she remained totally professional, totally calm, and kept asking the tough questions that he wasn't answering.
Yeah, I think he needs a therapist or some health professionals to go to work with him,
Gayle
too.
King's composure, it is its own thing this week. But even R. Kelly's former attorney, Ed Jensen, in the Sun-Times said that he is, quote, guilty as hell, and that he even made Kelly take libido shots to avoid getting into more trouble. Wow. What?
Well,
yes, exactly.
Jensen's retired now, right?
Yes,
good, because that was a pretty unethical thing. That was a pretty unethical thing to say when someone you represented to turn publicly on him like that.
Yes, and he's terminally ill as well. He has cancer,
right, so
and it's killing him.
Yeah, so even if he wanted to get something off his chest, that was his job as a defense attorney, and none of us want to be up here defending R. Kelly in any way, but this is the way our legal system is supposed to work. You're supposed to have some attorney-client privilege here, right, and that appears to be violated.
Let's talk about some business. On the business beat, the Lincoln Yards development makes more changes to height and density and adds new low-income housing to help clear the way for the massive $6 billion project. The zoning committee chair, Alderman James Kappelman, tried to delay the vote on the controversial project but was overruled. Steppenwolf announces a major new $54 million addition to the famed theater. Uber reportedly adding hundreds of jobs here, and the Willis-Aon insurance merger flames out 24 hours after it makes news. So was that trying to run for a political cover when Alderman James Kappelman tried to delay that vote on Lincoln Yards?
Yeah, I mean, he's been under tremendous pressure. The Chicago Teachers Union has made a big issue out of the TIF, the amount of the TIF in the Lincoln Yards project, and targeted Alderman Kappelman specifically. He's in a runoff election. Clearly was feeling a lot of the pressure and a lot of the heat on this. Attempted to delay the zoning committee consideration. And in a sign of just how greased this thing is, it was overruled by the rest of the committee, and they went ahead and approved it. Now, obviously, we've had Sterling Bay, the developer, make some real concessions, and they are real. The 600 units of affordable housing is a substantial amount of affordable housing in a project like this.
Steve James, have you ever seen anything like this, though, where the committee overrules the chair, pushes it on through?
No, I mean, Mick would probably have a better idea of that, since I don't follow city council that closely, but I think that's pretty unusual.
It's very unusual, and I think some of the aldermen were quoted as saying they had never seen it, people who had served 12 years and more. If you go to city council committee meetings, usually they're not following the rules at all.
Anyway,
it's very informal in a lot of cases, with just sort of a patina of formality. So the fact that somebody stepped up and basically said, let's have a vote to advance the thing, suggests they were prepared.
Yeah. So clearly a lot of forces at work then to push this through.
Well, the mayor is the main one, right? I mean, Mayor Emanuel wants this done before he leaves office in May. And, there are concerns about how either one of his successors would approach this if they ended up having this on their plate. So,
both women who are running have said that they won't think that the vote should have been delayed.
Right.
Should be delayed until after the election, so that people can have more time to have input.
Right.
And there's also the big issue of TIF money, which is sort of a whole separate issue from affordable housing and the height of the buildings and that kind of thing.
Might they be glad that the vote was taken, even though they're saying that they don't want to be a part of it?
Then they don't have to make the tough decision.
Exactly.
Briefly, Chicago's Uber, is adding more jobs here.
Please no.
Why Chicago?
Why
here?
Pretty crazy. I hope that doesn't mean they're going to have more cars. No, I don't mean
this is for their trucking business.
All right, that's all right. But the traffic is already pretty crazy. So.
Well, if it's for the trucking business, are more trucks on the road going to make?
Well, I mean, this is the biggest office for them outside of their headquarters in San Francisco. So I think one of the things is that's actually a good thing for Chicago to have a company of that size and stature and growth trajectory, seeing Chicago as a really good place to locate operational people, people who are running the business, and you know, beyond the people who are obviously driving the cars and the trucks and whatnot. So that's good. That's a sign that Chicago is an appealing destination for a West Coast sort of Silicon Valley type company. And that's all to the good of the city's reputation in terms of attracting those kinds of companies.
The jobs are great, but to Mary Ann's point, there needs to be some transportation policy. CTA ridership is way down. The streets certainly appear to be more clogged. The next mayor is going to have to really think strategically about how to balance all this.
What could the next mayor do? Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
Well, and that plays into the Lincoln Yards TIF. Most of that TIF money is going to transportation and transit-oriented improvements. So I think the TIF debate has been very confused in that particular development. That TIF is essentially what in an era when there's no federal money anymore for these kind of projects, state also obviously is got its empty pockets. The TIF is what the mayor has turned to finance these, you know, frankly, really needed infrastructure type developments. Now, you can debate whether that's a good financing tool or not, but it's kind of the only game in town at this point.
We're going to have to leave it there. We are out of time, though, but my thanks to Mary Ann Ahern, Mick Dumke, Laura Washington, and Steve Daniels. We will continue this conversation online in our Web Extra video, and we'll see you on the next edition of The Week in Review. I'm Brandis Friedman. You know, I don't know if I could have kept Gayle King's composure during that interview when R. Kelly is just kind of going off in front of me.
But you knew she had a fabulous video there, so just let him go.
So just let it happen.
Yeah.
I mean, could you guys have maintained that?
I would have sat there. I don't know if I would have hopped up as well. You know, I'm just like, what are you doing?
Or kind of backed up. Well, even her co-hosts on the show that day were Nora O'Donnell, was saying, you know, I was actually concerned for you and for your safety.
Yeah.
And Gayle says that she never felt unsafe.
How ugly.
Yeah, well, and we didn't get to talk about, Gayle King also spoke to two of the girlfriends who are living with R. Kelly, both of whom say they have a perfectly normal
and they blame their parents and said their parents are
the liars.
Closed captioning for this program is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, proud sponsors of the Chicago Bar Foundation's Investing in Justice campaign that supports pro bono and legal aid organizations for the needy throughout the Chicago area.